Welcome to uh, Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler, and my guest today is Scott Ritter. And Scott Ritter is going to talk about, his early dealings with the press and deniability of uh, WMD. So, I used to see you on TV back in the early 2000s, and I watched you on Phil Donahue's show. Can you give us a little history of how all that started?
Well, like any story, you got to go back to the beginning. I just didn't magically appear on Phil Donahue's show. Um, I had a I had a resume that made my presence there, attractive for him and his producers. That resume was founded in my background as a Marine Corps intelligence officer. I graduated from college with a degree in Russian history with a specialty in military history, and went into the Marine Corps. And because of that education background, the Marine Corps saw fit to make me an intelligence officer. Um, the Marine Corps training, at least when I went through, emphasized integrity overall. I mean, it was just pounded in you from day one. First of all, you're a Marine Corps officer, so right off the bat, everything you did was in alignment with the issue of integrity. You had to be honest. But as an intelligence officer, you weren't allowed to guess. I mean, you could make an assessment, but you had to be honest about the assessment. You had to tell your boss. Your job wasn't to tell your boss what he, or today she, wanted to hear. It was to tell them what the facts were, and you had to accurately put the facts out there without emotion, without any exaggeration. And the boss would make the decisions. And then your job was to continue to go out there and collect information, assess this information, and then provide that to your boss. The cycle of intelligence. And I was trained in that. I was trained, to focus on closing with and destroying the Soviet enemy through firepower and maneuver. My job was to kill Russians. And fortunately, we never had the opportunity to do that because that would have meant war. But we were ready, and we were pretty good. And I felt like the Marine Corps gave me a very solid foundation in the intelligence business. In 1987, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, to get rid of two classes of nuclear weapons that were threatening European security and by doing so, global security. And because of my background in Russian history and a little bit of Russian language, I was recruited to be an inspector. I went to the Soviet Union in June of 1988 and began a 2-year process of working outside of a Soviet missile factory, implementing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, making sure they were in compliance with their obligations. And in doing so, gained a lot of insight into the Soviet Union, Soviet politics, the Soviet military, et cetera. When that job ended, I went back to the Marine Corps, and Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and I found myself working for the Commandant of the Marine Corps on this ad hoc intelligence unit that was doing some secret planning for amphibious operations against Iraq. It got up to the Commandant, and the plan made it out to the region, but General Schwarzkopf rejected it. But I guess my participation impressed some people, so I was sent to Riyadh. I worked for General Schwarzkopf and went on his staff. And because of my expertise in missiles that came from my inspection time, I was given the task of trying to hunt down Iraqi Scud missiles before they could be launched against either Israel or the Arabian Peninsula. Um, I again came out of the war with a good reputation, even though we didn't kill any Scuds. But I left the Marine Corps in June of 1991. Was going to go forward and make my living in the civilian world, but the United Nations called me up. They were tasked with by the Security Council with the job of disarming Iraq, getting rid of their chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, long-range ballistic missiles. And their initial work, they started their work in April and May of 1991. By September, it became clear that the Iraqis were lying. They were hiding on their weapons. They weren't telling everybody everything. And now the United Nations had a difficult task of not just verifying what the Iraqis were saying, but hunting down what the Iraqis were hiding. In order to do that, they needed an intelligence capability. So I was recruited to come in and create an intelligence capability for the United Nations. And that turned into me being the ballistic missile expert for the United Nations, and then becoming sort of the guy who hunted down the hidden weapons, the concealment guy. I became a chief weapons inspector. I led 14 missions into Iraq as a chief weapons inspector. I went into Iraq more than 40 times over the course of a 7-year experience. I liaised with with senior officials from every relevant intelligence service in the world, from the CIA to MI6 to the British intelligence or the German intelligence service, Jordanian intelligence, you name it. If they had information about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, I was working with them. I also interacted with political decision makers. I was cleared into the White House Situation Room on 4 occasions to brief the Clinton administration at the Deputy National Security Advisor level. I frequently interacted with the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I traveled to London and met with their senior political and intelligence officials. Traveled to France, and the reason why I bring that up isn't to brag. I was doing a job. It's to highlight the fact that when it came to Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, I was perhaps the single most well-informed person in the world, because I interacted with everybody, with the Israelis, with the British, with the Americans. And with the Iraqis. I was getting the Iraqi version as well, which turned out, once we got through the lies and deceit, they started telling the truth. And so when you bring all that together, I was in a good position to know what the true status of Iraq's WMD capabilities were. In August of 1998, I resigned from my position as a weapons inspector, protesting what I deemed to be illegitimate American influence on the inspection process, that they were seeking to use the inspections more as a vehicle to remove Saddam Hussein from power and less as a vehicle of disarmament. And this turned into me taking a public stance against American policy with Iraq. And in 2002, when the administration of George W. Bush started to beat the drums of war, citing the threat posed by Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, I felt that I had a inherent obligation to speak out. Not because I'm anti-war. I think anybody who knows anything about my background knows that if needed to go to war, I would go to war. I went to war. And if there's a problem that only the military can solve, then the military should be sent in to solve it. But the military should be the option of last resort. You need to exhaust every option short of war before going to war, before putting the men and women who honor us with their services lives on the line. And with Iraq, we were going to war on what I believe to be a lie. The Bush administration was claiming it had absolute knowledge of retained Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and efforts by Iraq to reconstitute weapons of mass destruction. And I pointed out that when I left in 1998, we could account for 90 to 95% of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And we were monitoring 100% of their industrial capacity, so they couldn't reconstitute. So my question to the Bush administration is, what information do you have? Share it. Share it and I'll support your efforts. But they didn't have the information. They acknowledged they had no new intelligence. It was just a reimagining of the information that I was dealing with. And they ended up going to war on a lie. And that lie was exposed over time when it was found out that there were no WMD.
So there must have been other weapons inspectors that you were working with, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so when you came out against the, dogma of what the U.S. was trying to push, what was the reaction of your fellow weapons inspectors?
You need to understand that I committed economic suicide by speaking out. You instantly become unemployable. I was in a position with my expertise and my background. I could have worked at any think tank. I could have continued working in the government. I could have made a lot of money doing that. But by speaking the truth, I became unemployable. Not too many people are willing to do that. And I would say that the initial reaction of most of my compatriots was to keep quiet because they knew what I was saying was accurate, but they weren't in a position where they could commit economic suicide or willing to commit economic suicide. Some of the inspectors um, uh, disagreed with what I was saying, not because I was factually wrong, but because they had bought into the notion that Saddam was evil and needed to be removed, and they were willing to manipulate data to sustain that narrative. I won't give their names because I don't want to embarrass them. They know who they are, and anybody who's studied the issue knows who they are. They're the ones who testified before Congress. They're the ones who testified, who gave statements to the media. Their positions are documented, and they have been, without exception, proven false. My position is documented and has been proven correct. So I'm comfortable with how history has treated me, but I'm also realistic in knowing that, knowing what I know today and how little impact I had on changing the outcome, I would not advise anybody to do what I did. My family suffered greatly because of this. You commit economic suicide. You make yourself unemployable, and as somebody whose entire existence leading up to this was derived from the ability to get gainful employment through the U.S. government. When you lose that, the government controls everything. I mean, I was approached by universities who wanted to bring me on, but then they found out that the grant that they were using to underwrite my position came from the U.S. government. The U.S. government said, if you hire Ritter, you lose the grant. And so, boom, you couldn't work there. So, at the end of the day, you really have to ask each individual why they made the decisions they made. Some after the fact came out when it was safer to come out. People have come out and said, yeah, no, we were wrong, et cetera. Some Australian inspectors that have done that, some British inspectors, very few American inspectors, because in the United States, the truth is not rewarded with gratitude and employment. The truth ends up getting hammered. But that's that. It is what it is. I did what I did, and so be it.
So you were on TV, and when you were talking against the line that the government tried to bring out, and like I said, I saw you on Donahue's show. At first, did all of the people that interviewed you, did they believe you, or did they do it for ratings purposes?
When I first started speaking out, this was it was political dynamite. I was basically going to war against the administration of Bill Clinton. And there were, in terms of partisan politics, the Republican Party was 100% aligned against Bill Clinton. So, I testified before the U.S. Senate. I'm proud of it. It's a matter of history. I was the first. At that time, I was the only person to ever testify before a joint hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations and Senate Armed Services Committee. The Democrats tried to shut it down. Madeleine Albright and William Cohen, the Secretary of State and the Defense Secretary, were supposed to testify with me. So there'd be three of us. And Albright and Cohen wouldn't testify because they knew what was going to happen. I knew all the information. I was at all the meetings. I had all the receipts. I had all the documents, and they were to be exposed as liars. So they didn't show up, and the Democrats took umbrage at this. And they tried to shut down the Senate. They closed the Senate. And then Trent Lott, who is the Senate Majority Leader, took the unique action of, they played a parliamentary rule, and Lott closed the Senate and then reconvened it. Again, a unique parliamentarian move that had never been done before, so that I could testify. And the Democrats were angry. This is when Joe Biden, was a senator at the time. He and I had a famous clash where he lectured me for being Scotty Boy. Scotty Boy wants in. Scotty Boy's throwing a temper tantrum because Scotty Boy won't get in. Well, maybe people know more than you do. Maybe they have a higher pay grade. They make more money. That's why they get the limos and you don't. Just really ridiculous stuff. So bad that he got slaughtered by the media and had to apologize, and actually invited me back for a hour-long meeting and then he wrote me a letter of apology. But it was a big deal. The media loved me when I was bashing Clinton, but when my message became uh, more difficult to encapsulate politically, and I started to talk out in terms, especially after Operation Desert Fox in December of 1998, when the United States used intelligence information that my team had collected to try and assassinate Saddam. I said, look, you guys, you've killed the credibility of inspectors. No one will ever trust us again. Whenever an inspector shows up in Iraq, they can only be looked at as somebody who's collecting data to try to let the United States kill Saddam Hussein. Um, so I said, if inspections are dead, maybe we need to reevaluate what's going on here. Do we need more inspections? And I wrote a paper called The Case for the Qualitative Disarmament of Iraq. It was published in Arms Control Today. If you read it, it was written in June of 2000. It's the exact same conclusion the CIA reached in 2005, 2006, after they realized there were no WMD. They finally came out and they said the exact same thing then that I wrote in 2000. But in 2000, it was politically inconvenient. And it was politically inconvenient to put me on TV because I wasn't saying that which was being embraced as the mainstream narrative. I was going counter to the narrative. I remember when Bill O'Reilly, right after 9/11, Fox News hired me to be an on-air talent, guy to come on air. And I was their expert. So I'd travel down to New York City often to be on their different shows. And early on, I think they realized they made a mistake. Bill O'Reilly brought me on his program once, and he apparently thought that I was going to talk about how Saddam was pursuing a nuclear weapons program. And instead, I talked about how Saddam wasn't pursuing a nuclear weapons program, and he was embarrassed. And he literally, when the program ended, didn't give it up to shake my hand or anything. He wouldn't even look at me. He was that, and that's how it was. So Fox basically decided that I was inconvenient to put on the air, not just for Fox, but for anywhere. So they kept my contract, but they wouldn't let me go on air. And because I was contracted to Fox, I couldn't go on air anywhere. I just had to sit home and receive a paycheck from Fox. And so I did that until the contract ended. Then I went out and I spoke again. But they would bring me on. For instance, Phil Donahue, I thought was very responsible. He tried to bring me on. He had a wonderful producer, and they brought me on. And I was on his first show. I was, and I did a good job. I think he was happy with it. But MSNBC decided that telling the truth wasn't good for ratings. That telling the truth ran counter. That you make more money telling the lie. You make more money selling the war. And so they shut down his program. In fact, any program that brought me on could bring me on maybe one or two times, and then the decision makers said, no more of this. You're done. I got a lot of exposure in the international media, BBC and elsewhere, but in terms of domestic exposure, no, I was inconvenient. I ran counter, and the problem is normally they like to bring inconvenient people on and then slam them. Mm-hmm. Every time they brought me on, I slammed them. Again, it's a matter of record. My transcripts are available, and I'm proud of them because every single time I went on TV, I won that debate. I won it factually, and they never brought me on because they were embarrassed.
So Phil Donahue didn't last very long on MSNBC, but he had high ratings. Is that because he wanted to tell the truth?
Well, I think it's because he's Phil Donahue, first of all. He's a very popular guy. And I also think that people enjoyed the entertainment value of the show. When I was on, it wasn't like, here's a platform and let Scott Ritter run wild and say what he wants. The one time I went on, I went nose to nose with Richard Butler, the Australian diplomat who ran the special commission. And it was all out war. It was entertaining TV. And the other time I was on, I went nose to nose with Ahmed Chalabi, the Iraqi that was trying to overthrow Saddam. Mm-hmm. Senator Inhofe, he and I went at it, entertaining TV. But I think the problem was that the message that was coming out of Phil Donahue was inconvenient to the MSNBC brand. So even though his show had high ratings, the overall message was inconvenient to the brand. It was impacting the people who were beating the drums of war.
So a lot of people think there's a big difference between Fox News, and MSNBC News. Would you think it was accurate to say that the content with different slants are the same?
Well, I mean, I think we know that from Iraq. We know that both Fox and MSNBC and CNN were promoting the war. They just did it using different flavors of on-air experts. But none of them were coming out saying, "Hey, this war's stupid. Maybe there aren't any WMD. Maybe we should be asking more questions." They all slavishly followed the narrative that was being given to them by the Bush administration. So, no, I mean, one of the only difference is that um, Fox tends to be very Republican, and MSNBC and CNN tend to be very Democrat. So the politics of their narratives are shaped by how they will impact their political party. They want to slant things in a direction that is favorable to their political party and less favorable to the other. But in something like a war with Iraq, nobody did it right. They all were pounding that drum. They all wanted the war.
So, as the war progressed and people realized that there were no weapons of mass destruction, did you feel vindicated? And did anybody come on your side and say, "Hey, Scott, you were right"?
Uh, two questions. I'll answer the easy part first. Well, Bill O'Reilly. I mean, he thought he always wanted to get revenge, so he kept trying to bring me on to set me up to fail, and it never worked. And the last time, right before the war, I was on with General McInerney and some other people, and they all called me a traitor. I was a traitor because I was creating the conditions where American soldiers were going to be attacked by chemical weapons that I said didn't exist and all this stuff. So O'Reilly said, "Look, if when the Iraqis use chemical weapons against Americans, will you come on my show and apologize to the Americans?" I said, "Absolutely, in a heartbeat. I'll come on and I'll apologize." But I said, "But if it turns out there aren't any chemical weapons, will you invite me on your show and you apologize to me and the American people?" He said, "It's a deal." Um, to his credit, sometime around June of 2003, many months after the war ended, um, he came to the conclusion that there weren't any WMD, that the U.S. had been blowing smoke. And he tried to bring me on Fox onto his program, and Fox executives would not allow it. So Bill O'Reilly did an interview with ABC, I think Good Morning America. I'm not quite sure. I think it's ABC, Good Morning America. And he brought it up. And he said, they wouldn't let me bring him on, but I want to say that Scott Ritter was right, that he was right. And, I need to say that. So I'll give Bill O'Reilly, who I normally don't agree about anything with, him kudos for at least having the integrity to do that. Wolf Blitzer once offered a backhanded apology. Whenever I go on mainstream media, and it's very rare, they start out by saying, "Well, you were proven right." But then they slant it another way. But it's no longer about WMD. It's about democracy. It's about Iran. It's about this, about that. But no, I mean, the bottom line is there's no one in the media can say I got it wrong. So if I go on, they have to start off by saying you got it right. But you say, do I feel vindicated? Vindication works if this is about me. If this was personal, if I was doing this for personal vanity reasons, then vindication is a thing. I was trying to stop a war and I failed. How can you be vindicated when you fail? How can you be vindicated if, as a former Marine officer, one of my primary purposes was to prevent Marines from going to a war and dying in a war that didn't need to be fought, and yet they brought dead bodies home? I can't be vindicated. To be vindicated, I would have had to stop war. To be vindicated, I would have had to have been more powerful in my argument, more effective in my communication. While I may have had the facts on my side, clearly there was something wrong in the way that I was presenting the facts to the American people, because it was not successful in winning them over. And we went to war, and Americans died, and Iraqis died. So no, I'm not vindicated. Vindication can only come if you successfully, stop the war. The war happened, and how can I how could I ever feel vindication over that? I can't. It's not about me. It was about stopping a war, and I didn't succeed.
So, in your estimation, how many Americans were killed, during that time frame?
Well, it's not my estimation. I mean, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but that, the Department of Defense keeps very accurate figures. I think between Iraq and Afghanistan, I think the number is over 4,000, maybe somewhere around 5,000. I'm not exactly sure, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, look, we lost more Marines on Iwo Jima on day one during World War II than we lost in the global war on terror. Um, maybe not day one, but in the campaign, we lost more Marines and soldiers in Okinawa than we lost in the campaign. So, in the grand scheme of things, the loss of life, while tragic, you know, it had no impact on the military or on the country. I mean, the families that lost loved ones, they're sorry, but the rest of Americans don't care. They're not losing any sleep. So it's not that we lost a lot, but for me, one is too many. I care about the lives of the American men and women who put on the uniform. I understand that their lives sometimes need to be sacrificed in defense of our country. But before we ask them to do that, it has to be a sacrifice worthy of the blood we're asking them to spill. There was nothing about Iraq that was worthy of the sacrifice.
Well, killing is one thing, but statistics on the deaths caused by depleted uranium is another issue altogether. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think that now we're getting into mainly Iraqi civilians and the
And
cost.
Americans. Americans.
I don't think. I mean, look, I don't think we have Americans may have been exposed to depleted uranium in a very narrow um, time frame. I mean, if you're in an M1 Abrams tank that got accidentally hit by a depleted uranium shell from a fire from an American tank, friendly fire, or an A10, you may get in a situation where you were exposed and you absorbed depleted uranium. But by and large, the vectors for depleted uranium exposure to the Americans are very, very minimal. The people that pay the price are the Iraqis, because we fired a whole bunch of depleted uranium. For instance, in Fallujah, where we literally littered the soil with depleted uranium, and this has infected every aspect of their environment. Women are giving birth to horribly deformed children. The cancer rate is through the roof. And this is a lasting consequence of the decision to go to war. Again, I have a perspective maybe some anti-war people won't like, but if I'm going to war, I want depleted uranium in my ammunition, because it's going to cut through his tank like a hot knife through butter. And all I care about is killing the bad guy. Kill the bad guy, kill him fast, kill him easy. But I understand there will be consequences. We have to deal with those consequences afterward responsibly. But those are consequences that we should have deemed reasonable in light of the objective we're trying to achieve, that something is threatening the existential survival of our nation. Void of that, there's no justification for using depleted uranium. I mean, what we did is we waged an illegitimate war of aggression against the country based upon a false premise, and we used the means of war which have harmed innocent Iraqi civilians for decades and will harm them for decades to come. And there's no way you can justify that.
And on that note, we're out of time for today. So I'm sure we will continue this conversation. You've been listening to Scott Ritter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like what we talked about today, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Issues That Matter. Scott, it's always a joy to talk to you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Have a great day.